Okay. So, what exactly is going on? Maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking, what can I do? This biblical Hebrew is killing me. I mean, it's hard enough to read it with vowels. How do people read it without vowels? So you're killing yourself and you're wondering what to do. You're thinking about giving up. You see, there's a way. You just got to learn it correctly. You see, when most people learn biblical Hebrew, they learn it the wrong way. What do I say? When they get interested in learning biblical languages, sometimes they choose, I guess, Notrim, Christians call it the Old Testament. They want to first learn about the language. They don't exactly want to speak it or write it. They just want to be able to read it. But you see, reading is the second part of language learning. At first is speaking. Speaking is always the easiest. And then it goes reading, and then it goes writing is always the hardest. So, sorry folks, if you want to be able to learn the language and have it stick in your mind, you got to be able to speak it, read it, and write it. And that's not going to come about using some Bible program that's for sale for $500. And that's how these people sucker people into getting these Bible programs. Most of the time they're just worthless because all they really show you is something that you don't even really need. So, step number 1 to learning biblical Hebrew correctly is stay away from grammar. I cannot emphasize this enough. You cannot learn a language simply through grammar. And they do this on purpose because, sorry Europeans, I gotta pick on you here. Most of the books and grammar books and books on biblical Hebrew are written by Christian Europeans. Ooh, sorry if I stepped on any toes there. But they are. And they focus on simply grammar. And it can get kind of tedious. They go through all these long explanations about which grammar that you should follow, and they go into verb conjugation, stuff you don't even really know. Let's take it back. When we were kids, we didn't learn language through a grammar. We learned it through speaking. We learned it through vocabulary, how other people spoke the language. So we got to take it back to how people originally learned the language. So, okay. Step number 2, learn to read without the vowel pointings. This is one of the hardest parts. This is what most people who start with biblical Hebrew first and want to move on to modern Hebrew, or they want to learn rabbinical works, they always say, how do people learn without reading vowels, without the vowel points there? It's this magic trick. You got to be able to recognize words for words and stop being hooked on phonics. You got to be able to get hooked off phonics. You got to be able to recognize words. And reading without vowels will get easier as long as you can recognize the words. As long as you can recognize the words, then you can start reading without vowels. Because sooner or later it'll start to click in your mind. Oh, I've seen this word before. I know how it's pronounced. And, this is the participle form and other things like that. That leads into recognizing the roots. Number 3, recognizing the roots of words. As long as you can recognize roots, then it'll also be easier to learn. Usually, this is a tip here, usually vav, the letter vav, and the letter yod are added onto the word of some form of conjugation. So when you're looking for the root, and you don't need a Bible program for this, just simply usually about 70 to 80% of the time, you would just remove the vav or remove the yod from either the beginning, the middle, or the end, or the endings, the personal endings from the words, and you would have the root. Usually the root is three letters. 3 letters. That's usually the root. So once you have that, usually look for the root when you're starting to finally read without vowels, and I'll provide links for the Tanakh without vowels. Okay, moving on to step 4. Nouns. Nouns are usually made up of two words. Most of the time, They are two words put together, like a person's name. Most of the time, cities are made up of two words. Usually they are linked together, in this case of cities, by a dash. It's called a mapek in Hebrew. They'll be easily to recognize once you get used to it. And usually you can determine what a noun is simply by the context, because how the Hebrew Bible is set up. You want to call it divine, you want to call it whatever you want to say. Usually you can recognize it by simply the context, because usually the city name is related to the context of the passage, and when a baby is born, they usually name it after whatever the situation of how the baby was born. So that'll help you out too. So you'll be able to recognize nouns, and then you'll start building your vocabulary. And the fifth and final step is learning to recognize sentences. Now, I've read a post where this one language learner said grammar doesn't really exist. And I really agree with him. Grammar doesn't really exist. It's just how people formulate sentences. So if you really want to learn grammar and you really want to learn how the syntax, I think people should learn syntax more than they should grammar. If you really want to learn the syntax of biblical Hebrew and be able to recognize the sentences, you can go through the Tanakh and just isolate different verses, different passages. You can also have a program, Anki. I'm going to be uploading a deck on there with some biblical Hebrew sentences probably by the end of this week, so people would be able to do that. And just go through the sentences. You don't even really have to know the vocabulary, just be able to identify, get a gist of what the sentence is really trying to say. And also on the Anki program, there's biblical Hebrew vocabulary, and there's also many PDF files with vocabulary basically of the whole Hebrew Bible. It's actually pretty small for a language. It's only about 8,000 words, which is actually small for a language. So yeah, using all those steps will get you motivated and will probably get you excited to be able to learning the language again. Because in actuality, the language is actually more fun learning without vowels, I would say. Because it puts it on you to be able to recognize the meanings of the words. Because the vowels, we got to remember, people, the vowels are only there for beginners, really, and for people that don't know how to recognize words. Because originally, before the 7th century, there were no vowels. Ooh, no vowels. Ooh, no vowels imprinted on the text. They usually just used vav or yod to indicate a vowel. And on the link that I'm giving you, the text without vowels, it's used the plene spelling, the full spelling. So you'll just have vav and yod to guide you in what the text is trying to say. So I'll leave it at that. If you have any questions or anything like that you want to ask me, feel free to message me. So, all right, take care.